Meeple Nation Podcast, episode 459, Tiny Turbo Cars.
Welcome, citizens of Meeple Nation. For the next 30 minutes, sit back and enjoy.
Meeple Nation Podcast is sponsored by GameToppersLLC.com. We have been encouraging you to visit GameToppersLLC.com for quite a while now. I sure hope you've gone and visited more than once. I sure hope you've taken the opportunity to improve your game space. If you haven't, go and do so. This stuff is so good. And by stuff, I mean the actual game toppers, the mats, the cup holders, the dice towers, legs for the game toppers. You don't even have to have a table anymore to set it on. It can be its own table. Andy has one of those set up at his house, and it's awesome. The more people that we have coming over to game night now, that space is getting used quite often.
So I've noticed a consequence of getting my legs for my game topper for my Minecraft, a happy consequence that has happened. My wife is usually freezing cold in our house, even though it's in the mid 70s, and the basement's even colder. Well, I have our Minecraft with the legs set up in our upstairs living area. Over the Christmas break, we probably played maybe 30 different games in like a 3-day period. And it was all upstairs because she didn't want to go downstairs and be cold. I had no idea that was that big of an issue to her, and one of the reasons why she didn't want to go play games. But once there was a game topper set up upstairs where it was warm, we've played tons of games. It's been awesome.
That is cool.
On New Year's Eve, while we were at your house celebrating the end of 2022 and the dawning of 2023, Cheryl, I, and Sabrina played several games on that topper as well. And I was really surprised how curious and how inquisitive Cheryl was about the Minecraft and the leg kit. We talked about the difference between the size of the Watson and the Minecraft, the desire to upgrade to a Minecraft, but realistically doesn't make sense for the space that I have currently. It caught me off guard that she was so interested in these. And she even asked how much they were. We were looking at the mats and the quality of the mats that were on them. You had a mat on there that was not a game topper mat, and that she was comparing the quality between the two. All those questions and all those moments, I was like, am I going to get a new table?
Like, cross my fingers. Yes. Well, that's kind of cool because I had 2 mats on there. I had a game topper mat, and then I had my moon mat on top of that. That's a perfect opportunity to compare the quality of the 2 mats. There is not even a comparison, to be honest. The stitched edge and how it fits perfectly in the space. That moon mat, I've had to trim a couple of times to get it to fit. It was supposed to be exactly the right size. Anyway, you can't top the quality of game toppers.
I see what you did there.
Now, this episode isn't about game toppers, but we do love to talk about them, and we do love to play on them. You will too. Go to GameToppersLLC.com and check them out.
Welcome to Meeple Nation. We are your hosts. I am Andy Holliday.
I'm Douglas Stewart.
I'm Nathan Howard.
And I'm Dave Holliday.
Please come and visit our website. We have links to all of our episodes. We would love for you to check out what we have previously discussed on Meeple Nation. We also have blogs and photos. There are also links to our Facebook page, Meeple Nation Off Air, and our Twitter and Instagram. Join us on social media. We would love to get your insights as we share our gaming experiences with you. We also have bios on our website if you want to learn a little bit more about us and where we come from and how we became lovers of the board game hobby. And finally, please click on our link for our Patreon page. We love our patrons that are supporting us. We appreciate any additional help that you can send our way to improve the podcast and make it a better listening experience for you.
Well, this week I am excited to be talking about tiny turbo cars. Mom and Dad are out for the weekend, and Grandma will come to spend the night. But before she arrives, there's enough time to transform the house into a giant race course. Batteries for the radio-controlled race cars are loaded. Different tracks are set out around the house. The place is a mess. Who will be the best driver and win the Holiday Championship prize? Tiny Turbo Cars is a game by Hjalmar Hach, who is known for The King's Dilemma, Dragon Castle Railroad Inc., Photosynthesis, and it has a pretty great pedigree of other designers involved with this game, and was published by Horrible Guild Games in 2022. Tiny Turbo Cars is a frantic race game for 2 to 4 players in which you program the movements of your tiny toy cars in advance, with sliding puzzles acting as your remote controllers. Choose your car, grab your remote controller, create the track, and get ready to race. At the beginning of each round, players have to work their way through their sliding puzzle controllers simultaneously, trying to create the sequence of actions they want their car to perform during the round. This, I think, is really cool. The controllers are these really meaty components, so it almost feels like you are holding a game controller or an old school remote control, the ones that were actually big and had some heft, not the new ones that have the little wheel that turns, but the old ones that had the up, down, left, right, sort of the orthogonal directions on them. But instead of electrical components on the face of that controller, you've got a 4x4 grid. It's one of those 4x4 sliding puzzles. But instead of having numbers on them, the tiles in that grid that slide around have symbols. Players are going to slide those around to try to get the symbols that they want in the right order. So even though it's a 4x4 grid, you're only going to use those middle 2 as your program, which gets kind of tricky. On those sliding puzzles, you've got the one piece that you can move around. And if you program your top row, but that blank piece is above it, something's got to give so you can move that blank piece down and work your other pieces around. If you have a lot of practice with these sliding puzzles, you're going to be at a huge advantage playing a game like this. And if you're not like me, then you're going to frequently find yourself cussing at the table. So not only is the game a race to move your cars down the track, but it's also a race to program those controllers, because the first person to get done programming their controller gets to take the most smiley of the smiley tokens that come in the game. Then the next player gets to take the next one, and so on and so forth, until everybody but the last player has taken one. And then everybody's going to start counting down from 10. So the last person has 10 seconds to wrap up their programming, and then that phase is completely done. Starting with the player who finished their programming first, they're going to go through and they're going to execute those middle 2 lines of programming on their controller. Once they're done with that, they can take any bonus actions, cards, tokens, anything like that they may have, and then it moves to the next player. So it's really advantageous in this game to get that programming done quick. If you can execute your program and then generate things that will affect the other players, and we'll kind of get into what that means, because you can lay down terrain, you can create obstacles, you can do all kinds of things that will affect other players as they're trying to execute their programming. If you can get done with that first, it's highly, highly advantageous.
I love how the anxiety of the game, I mean, you're already stressed trying to deal with that puzzle. And then if you happen to be the last person and everybody else starts counting down, you have that 10-second crunch to finish your puzzle. I mean, if the anxiety of the game wasn't enough that you're already struggling with that puzzle, the countdown just amplifies that exponentially.
When we were playing this last time, you guys started counting down, and I was like, I guess I'm done. Once you guys are doing that, I can't even, nothing's happening.
Can't even think.
Nothing's happening. I have a hard enough time anyway. And then all I can think about is those numbers coming out of your mouths. Guess I'm done too. But that's one of the great things, I think, is everybody's doing this simultaneously. If you are that guy that is always trying to make it so that people aren't waiting around for you, it's only 10 seconds. Nobody's ever really sitting there going, okay, come on, guys. I guess you could be if you're the first one done and everybody else is just taking forever. But if it's just generally one person that's going to be a little slower, this is a great mechanic to mitigate that.
At the same time, like Doug said, there is definitely a benefit to going first. It really is a race. You want to go as early in the round as possible. And in that last game, Dave, you and I tied.
Right.
And that was the tiebreaker, whoever had the smiliest smiley face.
Mm-hmm.
There are quite a few reasons, not just as a tiebreaker, but there are quite a few reasons during the game it can be incredibly advantageous to go first. Just to mention one, if you run into another car, you're going to take damage because that car is considered an obstacle. Whereas if you're going first, your odds of running into another car, unless you're way behind, are fairly slim. You go into it going first, you can go into it knowing where all the cars are to begin with. So it's your own fault if you run into it. Going first is huge, I think, in this game. And that's why, like what Doug said, it's so important to go first. Yeah, you get that extra time if you're last to program. But I still think going first is more important.
Yeah, but sometimes you press that, easily make a mistake where you're turning left or instead of turning right, or you didn't look at the map close enough that there's an obstacle right in front of you that you totally overlooked. That's what makes the game awesome, in my opinion. I mean,
agree.
The chaos that is on there. I mean, you feel the tension of trying to race through it. You were overzealous. You ran into the wall, got too excited, and you turned left instead of turning right, and you ran into a doll. all that translates to real life anxiety if you were really racing your cars with a controller.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's kind of an interesting decision space to create. It's a really anxiety-ridden decision space because just as equally important as going first or second or quick in the round is also making sure that you've taken time to actually get your programming right. Because you can be the first player out of the gate, and if your programming is awful, you're going to get all kinds of messed up, and it's way worse.
You may only end up moving one space. That's speaking out of experience.
Yeah. Tell us about that, Andy.
Well, not the last game we played, but the game before that, I was in the lead. I was winning. Everything was going wonderfully. My turn left was slipped in the wrong spot, wrong order, and I just went forward and hit an impassable object like a stack of books nonstop for like the entire program until the very last thing, and then I was able to move around it. I wasted my entire movement on damaging my car, which when you take damage, you have 3 batteries in front of you, which is your energy. When you take a point of damage, you flip a battery over. If all of your batteries get flipped, then your next 3 programs or your next 3 commands in your program have to be recharging your batteries. Once again, if you don't program correctly, and even if you're taking damage, that totally messes up your program. You forfeit the next 3 commands to recharge, and then you start from where you currently are, and you continue your program from there, which can lead you into all sorts of terrible places that you did not intend to go.
To all of you Robo Rally fans out there, this game really scratches that itch quite well. Probably are already thinking and wondering about that when you're hearing your program and your commands and all of that, because that's what Robo Rally is. This is a much quicker Robo Rally-esque game. And that's one of the things I love about it. Robo Rally is long time one of my favorite games. I've really enjoyed this game. But Andy, you just mentioned something when you talked about running into a stack of books. The thing that I love even more probably about this game is the idea of what's going on. I love, Doug, your description of it. Grandma's coming over to babysit. And so we got to hurry and get the house set up to do this race. And when you're looking at these tiles, they're awesome. There's fire. You've started parts of the house on fire. We probably should have started this episode with a parental guidance warning. Maybe don't let your kids listen without you there. They've tracked snow in the house, and there's all this ice sections where you're going to go sliding across the floor. Looking at what the art and the obstacles of what is actually happening on the ground is just awesome.
100%. This is absolutely something that I did as a kid. Well, I didn't start the house on fire and I didn't bring snow into the house, but I absolutely set up a basement with a little indoor track for my RC car. I had my army men out there, and I had my blocks, and I had the Tinker Toys and Legos and everything else, and jumps and books and my sister's stuffed animals. Everything that's on these tiles artistically and everything that this game represents as far as the track goes feels familiar. And it just brings back so many fun memories of racing cars. And especially as a kid from Idaho, a lot of the times when I'd get a little RC car or something like that, it was for my birthday or for Christmas, which both take place in wintertime. Cold outside. Where else were you going to play? You were going to play inside the house. You were going to build an epic track, and you were going to race your car around the basement. I really love the theme of this game. It's fantastic.
So this has been killing me the whole time we started talking about this episode. Andy and his wife threw a party right before the holidays, and it was an unbelievable, amazing time. And Andy, I'm going to let you explain all about that.
So this was actually my wife's idea, which is funny because she's not played this game at all. And she's never, in fact, I tried to get her to play it over the holiday and we didn't get a chance to. So she knew nothing about it. She just said, we need to have a party. I remember having a lot of fun as a kid with my RC cars. So we need to have RC cars. And she was coming up with different games. I'm like, well, let's just set up a racetrack in the basement. So the game room was converted. The Minecrafts got pulled out and a racetrack was put in. We have different obstacles. The upright bar stool seemed to be the absolute worst obstacle that there was on the track. It was terrible.
The loose sheets of paper were terrible too.
Yeah, loose sheets of paper, you'd slide around. We had obstacles in there to try to slow things down. And it was, as we were talking about this, it kind of reminded me of that too, Nathan, because it was a circular track. And one of the mechanics of this game is if you start your next command on a water space, on a wet space, you have to gain the slippery token. And at that point, from the rest of your commands, whenever you move diagonally left or right, they are then switched. And it reminded me of trying to maneuver those cars coming back towards you and turning the wrong direction, right? Especially because that stupid bar stool wasn't on the way back. So you're trying to get around. You're like, dang it, I turned the wrong way again. I think they did a great job just with the feel of that RC car where how many times do you turn the wrong way? We did one where one person was blindfolded and the other person had to help the person around the track. We did a couple different types of races, and I loved that my wife had come up with that. I thought it was great.
I enjoy the comparison because as we talk about tiny turbo cars, and then we can compare it to a real life experience, stepping back in time with you, Doug, where Andy had set up this racetrack in his house. We were having a real experience. I think that allows us to compare the anxieties of, oh, I turned left instead of turning right. I think the game nails down and emulates so many of those feelings, frustrations, and enjoyment of the real life race that we had in your basement and put it onto this tabletop game, one of the best translations of a real life experience to a board game.
I'm just glad my basement didn't get lit on fire.
We tried, and I'm sure Caden could get it there.
That's true. Lydia did try to light my basement on fire because her car started smoking.
It did. I was just going to say, yes, there was smoke. There was no fire, but
there was smoke.
Speaking of smoke, I'm looking at one of these tiles right here, and the artwork here, you've got the oven, and smoke is just barreling out the oven door, and so it's filling the whole racetrack. And the cool thing that the game makes you do is if you are starting your programming, so you've finished the last round, and you're about to start the second round, if your car is in that smoke area, you have to hold your controller upside down and program it upside down. Kind of simulate the whole you can't see thing, so you don't really know where to go.
And that same game, we all started in smoke. So we all had to begin the race programming our controllers upside down, which, again, I loved it. When Andy first got this game, he got the Kickstarter version. And when he started to explain the game, I have never been so excited to play a game. He hadn't even finished rule explanation, and I was just big smiles. Can't wait to play. Every time I've played 5 times now. This game it fires on every cylinder for me. I'm all in on this. And I so wish I had backed it because there's some expansions that came in the Kickstarter version. Of course, the quality of your pieces, much higher quality than the street version. So if you can still find it out there, if you can find the Tiny Turbo Cars Collector's Edition, you will not be disappointed. I'm hoping these other expansions you were able to pick up with the Kickstarter will be available. There's one of the expansions, a speed up expansion that allows you to play up to 6 players, gives you new obstacles, power upgrades as soon as you cross over one board, and then it also gives you 2 extra controllers because there's a wide variety of cars. And each of the other expansions, the Adventure Crew, the Fantasy Squad, the Space Team expansions, all introduced new cars, each with asymmetrical powers, added terrain, added hazards that are available. If you can get the whole collection of Tiny Turbo Cars, it's so worth the money. I wish I had backed it. Even though you already had it in your collection, Andy, this is definitely a game that I need in mine as well. And comparing your deluxe version to my street version still works, but that collector's edition is by far the better way to go.
Now, lest you think that we're going to do nothing but gush about this game, I am going to give some criticism.
But first, I'd like to gush some more.
Go for it.
I have a lot more gushy things to say.
That's fine. There's just one little thing, and it's not a big deal. One little thing that I personally would like to have seen is when you set up this game, you set up a tile, and then there's a smaller tile. When I say tile, it's a full game board, right? It's a full 7-inch by 8-inch tile with the grid on it with all the spaces that you can move your car. You set that up, and then there's a smaller one, and then another full-size one, and then a smaller one. And this is so that you can vary all of the terrain and all of the different things. They're all double-sided, and so it provides a lot of replayability and a lot of just different experience, which is very cool. When you set it up, it's one big straightaway, and I would just personally like to have seen the art have the corners, turns, and going from one room to the other be a little bit more visual that way. But I don't know how they would have done it, honestly.
Yeah,
it would have been really, really difficult to do. And like I said, it doesn't really affect the gameplay.
Yeah, and you mentioned those smaller tiles that get inserted in between the larger ones. So that's an expansion. You don't actually have to play with those, but it does add extra flavor. The archers, when someone drives over top of the activation switch, the archers shoot arrows in every direction, forward, backward, side to side, and anybody that gets hit takes a damage. There's tree folk that you have to pass. So you want to pass them quickly so you don't take any damage. Or if you jump over them, you take a little bit, but not so much. Anything else, and you're going to take 2 damage on your car. There's
Twice.
just a lot of, well, that's only if you pass through 2 days. Most of us only pass through them once, not twice. I love the fact that there's the variety. There's not just static obstacles, because there are a lot of obstacles on there. The artwork is there's different toys and stuff that are obstacles, and they all act the same. If you enter that space, you take a damage, your movement immediately ends, and you move to your next command. But there's more to it than just obstacles. There's carpet, which is going to slow you down. We mentioned the smoke. If there's fire, if you go through the fire, it doesn't stop your movement, but it's going to damage you and does 2 damage to your car. There's holes in the floor. I would do something unspeakable to my children if they put holes in my floor while I was gone, or lit my house on fire. But there's a lot to it, between the water and the fire and the smoke, and they have stacks of books that are impassable objects. You can't jump over them. You have to just go around them. Thematically, I think they've done such a great job, and the variety of things on the racetrack, that makes every race not feel the same every single time, and with the asymmetrical powers as well.
I absolutely love the modularity of the board and how the track gets set up every single time. I think that's an absolutely genius thing about how this game was designed. And you talk about the smaller tiles that go in between. I personally would always play with those. They add so much flavor to the game. And we talk about it kind of being this almost cinematic-like experience of racing these cars along the track. That's what adds a lot of that cinematic feel or flavor, right? One of the tiles that we played in the last game was like those traps. If you're the first car through, you can make it safely, but then the trap falls behind you. And it's that cinematic moment where it's like, okay, we just barely made it through, but now all the cars behind have to find a way around or have to go over or do something creative to figure out what they're going to do. One of the games we played, one of those tiles was a robot that kind of goes back and forth. It's like that almost Frogger style thing. It's heading back and forth. And so you could create obstacles for other players, and you're trying to dodge that and outthink where the robot's going to go, that kind of thing. I absolutely love the flavor that those add, and I would probably never choose to play without them. I think they are brilliant.
The game you talked about where you went over the trap and the trap got laid, that particular game was crazy because in that same game, one of the options that you can play with are the power cards. When you get past your first tile and then move on to the second large tile, you gain a power card. And everybody gets one. There's a number of players plus one that are available. So when you pass it, you get to choose one of these. And the one that Dave picked were the thumbtacks, or the pins that you put on the track. And you can put them on anywhere on your turn. And when someone runs into it, their movement stops. And not only that, but their turn ends. Their program completely ends. So it's like a crazy powerful ability. And Dave happened to put those right next to the traps. So poor Nathan, I believe you were the last person to go in that round. And there were, I can't remember if all 3 traps were sprung, but I know 2 of them were sprung, and Dave's 2 pins were on the board too. And I think you ended up hitting one of the pins and your turn ended completely.
Yeah, I was the only person that didn't cross the finish line because of the pin. The downside to that is it ends your turn. Realistically, you got to go over there and pull the pin out of the wheel or whatever that's stopping your car from moving. So it makes sense. It's frustrating, but thematically it makes sense. I mean, there's so much of this game that just makes me smile that they just nail.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because if I do have a criticism, and it is a small one, it would be some of those power cards. This game, through the asymmetric powers in the vehicles, through the power cards, it does have some take that things, but they're all thematic and fun, and most of them are pretty light and don't ruin somebody's gameplay experience. I do feel like there are a couple of those, like the tax, that kind of ratchet that take that element up a notch and could potentially ruin the game for somebody else, especially if you're playing with somebody new or introducing the game, for the first time. And so if it were me, I may go through and take some of those really bad take that cards or tiles or things out, at least for the first few times that you play. But other than that, I think this game was a home run.
Out of the park.
So this game, typically I have been terrible at. Not just terrible, but really terrible at. Historically, almost every game I've played, I've been the person with the saddest face. And in fact, to the point where can't even be considered a smiley face. It's a frowny face.
So your regular face.
Yeah. My phone would recognize it.
Candy.
And just because that puzzle controller was killing me, trying to get my program exactly how I wanted it. And everybody would finish theirs too quickly. And so when we played it the last couple times, I thought, okay, I'm going to think a little quicker on my feet and try to get this to where I can finish faster. And I managed that, but I think it also helped with the cars I played. So the last time I actually won my first game, it was the first game I didn't finish last, and I actually won. And I was the Speed Rover, and it's the little spaceman race car. Every time that I moved, and with one single command, every time I moved 3 spaces or more in a command, I got one of my tokens. And then I could spend those tokens at the end of my turn to either move 1 space forward or 1 space diagonally to the left or 1 space diagonally to the right. And I actually made it not only across the finish line, but I made it to the very end of the track because of those tokens. Those tokens were a huge help for me, especially the one round that I really messed up my programming. I was able to get around an obstacle because I had one of those tokens and set myself up to where it was almost a straight shot across the finish line. That's what I think is great about the asymmetrical powers. I love games that have asymmetrical starting powers anyway, but I think there are like 18 different, at least in the Kickstarter version, there are 18 different cars you can play. Each one of them plays very differently. I believe, Nathan, the first time we played, you played with the flying carpet car, and you did phenomenal with that car.
Yeah, up until the 2 recent plays, I was undefeated. Today, I tasted that bitter cup of defeat twice. Yeah, the flying carpet was awesome. Before I began programming my moves for that turn, I was able to put a carpet in front of me, which would allow me to do a +1. The plus makes the next command on my controller go 1 space further. And so the flying carpet would allow me to jump 2 spaces and then move a 3rd space, which was great for going over obstacles. It made missing a lot of the debris, avoiding the holes. I mean, I was just able to breeze right through it so I could end my turn in front of an obstacle, jump over it on the next turn. I flew across the board on my flying carpet like it wasn't even there.
We played last Thursday, and I played the time machine, and it was not my friend. So with the time machine, you must repeat your first action. So you basically get 9 commands, which should be theoretically amazing, right? Not if you don't plan accordingly. I was always the last player because I'm trying to plan accordingly with my time machine. Ironically, I needed more time. It actually hurt me almost every single time because I had to repeat that command. And I think I took damage almost every time.
Yeah, all of the different, I think you said there are 18 different cars that you can start with. First of all, I love that, right? Like, there's so many choices and just so much difference there. And they each have some different ability that they do. And I don't think they're all equal, but again, I'm okay with that, right? Like, I don't think they have to be 100% balanced. The first time we played, I had one that I thought was going to be pretty cool. It ended up really being pointless. Like, it didn't ever do anything for me the whole time. But the second time we played, I had the jungle buggy, and it was amazing, right? Like, anytime I hit an obstacle, it allowed me to jump 1 space forward and then drive 1 space forward. So I was just like, oh my gosh, I just got a plan to bump into all these obstacles and just make sure, that I recharge my battery every now and then. Every time I hit an obstacle, I'm going to get 2 spaces out of it. That's the only reason that I was able to catch up with you at that final piece.
So your first car you played was the tank, and I think the tank is a car that you would struggle with because I think if you're going to play with that car, you want to make sure that you go first in the round so that you know where every car is on your turn, because what it does is it'll shoot in every single direction, right? So when you shoot your missiles, normally there's a missile command. It'll shoot 1 missile, and it shoots it just straight down the track. It'll hit everything in that line, and that's it. With the tank, you shoot in all directions. And
in all orthogonal directions.
All four orthogonal directions. If you're the first person to go in the round, then you know where everything is, and you can make sure that you're doing that damage. If you are a person like me and like you that typically is not the first one done, basically you're lucky if you hit something, right?
On top of that, like, you need to be the first one done, but you need to be planning not just for the stuff that you're trying to do, accomplishing the race, but you need to be planning for, okay, all the other people around, where are they, so that I can...
Right. And I think that's what's great, is each car forces you to play a different way. Mm-hmm. Someone who is better at doing the programming than I am probably would have destroyed with the time machine. But because that's my weakness in this game, it actually ended up hurting me. Whereas I think if it was Nathan, he probably would have absolutely destroyed us with it because he is able to do that puzzle much faster than I am.
So it does bear to note that in the base game, in the street version of the game, there are only 8 cars in the box. A lot of that extra variety comes from those additional expansions. But still, even with the 8 cars that are in the base game, the variety on the maps and the maps being double-sided just allows for so much variety in the game that provides such a great game experience. The game will not disappoint.
Well, if you can't tell, we absolutely love Tiny Turbo Cars. And no matter what version of it you have, we think you're going to have a great time too. And with that, we'll wrap up our discussion of Tiny Turbo Cars. Until next time,
We'll see you blowing past that checkered flag, out the patio door, ending your race in the backyard.
As always, we want to thank you for listening.
Check out our website. We have all sorts of cool things there. Love those blogs. Get a deeper look into the writing side of Meeple Nation.
Join our Facebook group, Meeple Nation Off Air. I look forward to seeing you there.
Follow us on Twitter at Meeple Nation. We also have Instagram.
Under the same name. We also want to thank our sponsor, GameToppersLLC.com.
We love their product, and they have so much goodness out there.
And we also want to thank Braiding Detergent for our music.
a little sluggish out of the gate here, fellas.
We say jump over way too much, so I'm not going to say that. We've been encouraging... Yeah.
Ba-dum-bow.
I just thought of, I don't remember what movies it is, with several movies and TV shows. Mom, I'm doing it. I can't remember what they are.
Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Is there one in that?
There is one when they go to, and he's like, but they go to the friend's house or whatever, and he's got his gun out, and he's like, Mom, I almost shot you right then.
Yes.
Trying to get her to be quiet.
There's that one where like he's like in one of those virtual worlds where it's changing his voice and stuff. So you're hearing the other side of it or whatever. And then all of a sudden it goes to like the super nerdy dude and like, Mom, I'm
So tiny turb. Yep. Yep. We got this.
Wait, are we saying tiny turd?
Tiny turd cars. Tiny. Yep.
Whoa, that must be a Mycroft. Boom.
Nice.